Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you are. My name is Kristen Palazzolo, and I am the Community Manager for the CA Security Community. Today's community webcast is on cybersecurity forensics. You're going to hear from Dipto Chakravarty, who is a Senior VP here on the CA Security team. He's going to talk about the state of digital forensics and cybersecurity today, how threat intelligence and big data can be combined operationally, and what the future of forensic analytics looks like. This webcast is being recorded, so we will be posting the replay to the CA Security community, as well as Dipto's slides, and I'll send a follow-up email to everyone who is attending today. So we're going to open it up for Q&A at the end of the call, but if you have any questions during Dipto's talk, please feel free to ask them in the chat window or the Q&A panel, and I'll be happy to ask them to Dipto as soon as we get a chance. So thank you, Dipto, for joining us today. We're really excited to learn more about this. Cybersecurity was big in the news today, but really it's big in the news every week, I feel like. So this is a great topic to talk about, and I'm excited to learn more about it. So thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to wherever you are signing in from. Happy to be here. Hope you guys can hear me clearly, and if not, Kristen, please type in something on the window.
I can hear you great. Thanks, Dipto.
Okay, just doing a mic check. So I'd like to spend the next hour with you talking about this, the cybersecurity, forensics, and the role of big data, and really take you down a journey that is one of the applications that doesn't get mentioned in the press as much. What gets mentioned in the press are the failures and the hypes. So part of this comes from my past work and some of my past experience. Part of it is from research. Part of it is from our product applications. So this is going to be more around thought leadership and the way we would like to structure the time. Let me spend about 40 minutes with you going over through the material and leave about 20 minutes for Q&A. You're welcome to ask questions as we proceed, and you can also put those in the chat window. So today's topic, big data. What good is big data? What good is threat intelligence? What good is analytics? What happens with technology is when it's in the hype period, it gets talked about a lot. It gets talked about in the press. It makes the headlines when it's in the hype phase. When it's in the phase of usefulness, then its applications begin to get talked about, like we are talking about today. Once it gets adopted and it's gone mainstream, then it just gets used. It never gets mentioned. It never makes the headlines or the bylines, which is why nobody hears about, one of the examples is TCP/IP. It's commodity. Nobody hears about that. It's internet. It's commodity. We assume it's there. So I broke down the topics, today's topics, into really three parts. And the first part, we're going to visit big data in cybersecurity. I'm not going to talk about analytics. I'm not going to talk about big data. I'm not going to talk about the definitions. I'm going to assume you know it, and we're going to set the baseline, the stage, and we are going to get into the cyber forensics part, which is the meat of the discussion, and then I'll review some of the very useful tools we have and what I've used and the teams have used over the years, and how do you actually collect digital evidence. So around the application of big data and around the application of analytics, the application of analysis and insight, what really is happening is we are taking haystacks of data, we are narrowing it down to the right haystack, then we are finding the needle in the haystack, and that often takes from hours to days to weeks, unlike the demos where it takes seconds. So it's really a map-produced version of lots of data lakes to data to information to decision to action. You might take one action out of 3 decisions coming out of 3 KB of data, of information that came from 3 gigabytes of data. That's the kind of reduction that we see. So cyber forensics the second part is going to be around cyber forensics, which in its basic definition is there are different types of forensics. I'm going to take you through about 8 different types of forensics. There are about 12 types of forensics. I'm going to just focus on the 8 because those make up 80% of the crime prevention techniques and crime detection and the evidence capture techniques. And I'll also review some of the tools with you. And then we'll talk about some of the what's happening with software, a lot of the fortification, a lot of the militarization of software, where it's really not just the practice of collecting digital evidence, but how do you actually how we are exploiting technology for crime prevention. So setting the stage for what is forensics. Forensics is the practice of, collecting evidence, collecting digital evidence specifically, and I've broken that up in 4 parts. Largely, all of us who dealt with evidence collection, there are 4 stages. There's a preparation stage, then there's an acquisition stage, then there's analysis, and then reporting. The analysis happens to be one of the longer phases, and preparation takes a long time. Preparation takes a long time. It has to deal with identifying the resources, making sure all the resources are covered, and then dealing with the acquisition, which is where all the captures happen. We are pulling data, we are pulling sources, sensors, and we are looking at the sources of evidence, whether these are coming from keyboard buffers, or they're coming from USB ports, or they're coming from RJ45 network connectors. Think about it this way, that when your house gets burgled and fingerprints are being collected, the crime scene investigators will come in and they will collect fingerprints by dusting off the prints, by putting special powder on it, and then putting a transparent tape that pulls out the fingerprints. Just like that, so I have worked for several years collecting or helping collect digital evidence for the usual agencies, the usual 3-letter agencies for the government, but really training the people how to collect digital evidence is a little more, harder than the regular fingerprint collections. Like keyboard buffers are extremely hard to capture. USB, relatively easy. Network ports, really, really easy to capture network ports. Really hard to capture the printer ports data. But there are lots of little nicks and crannies where in your computer, digital evidence is preserved, and it has to be captured and extracted and acquired and analyzed and correlated in a way that you don't overwrite the buffer, you don't hit a backspace accidentally, because backspace will erase some of the buffers. It'll erase some of the footprints and what we call are the breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs would be a trail of evidence that you leave behind when you're committing a set of frauds or breaches. So acquisition will be about the sources, and the step 3, this takes a long time. We extract, collect, analyze, correlate, and touch upon the various, multivariate points about what the analysis is looking like. And the last step is the mechanical step of reporting the evidence. Those are really the 4 stages of what we call forensics. And I call this Forensics 101 because we can spend 2 days on these 4 steps, but today I'm going to spend about 5 minutes on these steps and then go into each one of these areas and hopefully give you some insight that you have not had before. So different types of cyber forensics, I broke those down and I highlighted only the ones that I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to take you through each one of them and try to make it interesting for you and relevant for you. So in no particular order, we're just going to go one by one, and as I go through these, I'm going to mention a set of techniques, I'm going to mention a set of tools, and I will mention a set of practices. So part 1 is the email forensics. So emails, I call them like footprints in the snow. Wherever you go, whatever you do, whatever emails you send, whether you copy and paste or you send it from your pop mail, it doesn't matter. Those are archived somewhere. And it's relatively easy it's one of the easiest evidence to collect, is email trail. So easy that entry-level digital forensic analysts are assigned that email forensic data capture or data gathering job. So deleting an email doesn't mean it erases any records, it just marks those records as erased. And I think the Google Mail, when Gmail came about, they first made that point kind of obvious to the rest of the world, but always email systems have been created in a way that records are never purged. It just gets marked for delete, unless you have a circular buffer set up or for data aging or et cetera. So a couple of tools that are used very extensively. One is the MITEC viewer. It's really for capturing Outlook email and also Windows Live Mail. You can do search, you can do filtering of various kinds. It's a relatively easy, I wanted to share this with you because you will find it quite easy to, you can figure this out in minutes of using the MITEC viewer, giving you a view into the world of, it's almost like an audit trail of emails, both the ones that have existed and the ones that have been purged. And then we have the famous Outlook, the PST-OST viewer. This is a very straightforward editor-like interface. Outlook has two kinds of archive files, PSTs and OSTs, so with the file name extensions .ost or PST, depending on whether you're saving them on your laptop or you're saving them on the Exchange server. So we use this pretty extensively. Law firms are big on it. We use this as one of the first steps, and this is the easiest one. So with that, I'm going to go to the part two. As I go through these, the little icon on the top right is going to change, and the circle is going to move to the different types of forensics I'm going to talk about so that we can keep up with the workflow. And we'll go through these 8 different things one by one. So data forensics is, again, not as easy as email, but right now, the way it's done, at the current days, the last couple of years, data mirroring is used. Basically, we do a one-way mirror or two-way mirror to just collect the data evidence. We have a couple of tools. One is a live viewer and one is a dump tool, like a dump analyzer tool. So live view I listed here. And again, there are lots of other tools. I only listed the top 2, the ones that have been my favorite and I think gives you a holistic view of the world. The live view tool will create a VM, a virtual machine, like a VM image of a physical disk. And then you can walk through and view data block by data block. You can also view it through a user persona. You can actually emulate at a session level. You can emulate this as a user level. It gives you a nice way of what I call is a jog shuttle of a VCR. If you, in the VCR days, we had a jog shuttle that essentially you could rewind it back or fast forward it to kind of go back and forward to see exactly where exactly at what time the crime was committed. So that's a live view. Allows you to kind of do a time travel back and forth. And then the second tool is the tool called Dump It, is a tool that creates an executable essentially for the incident response teams use it a lot. They just, it just creates an executable on your USB and you can just walk away with a browsable, viewable, readable version of your data forensics for whichever crime scene you're gathering data from. So again, I'm building this up from easier to the harder, not linear, but they're going from the simpler ones to the not so simple ones. Let's talk about disks. Again, fairly straightforward. The 2 tools I have shared with you here. The cyber forensics on the disk is really about, has to deal with identifying hidden files. It has to deal with, it deals with like erased files. You can erase a file 20 times. You can write over the data blocks. You can write over the blocks in creative way. You could do nibble by nibble write, or you could do byte by byte write. You could do on word boundaries, and you could demagnetize it. Whatever you do, I can recover it. I can recover most of the data. Unless you've written on a NiCad disk, which is a nickel-cadmium disk, and it's an analog disk, and you've run it through a train track and crushed it, we can recover it. data is only about magnetized and non-magnetized ones and zeros, so it can be recovered. There's very sophisticated techniques of recovering disks. A lot of people just drive or screwdriver or power drill through the hard drive so that it's not readable. We have been able to read even those drives, by the way. You need special tools, but if you drill a hole into a disk and hand me the disk, except for that physical sector, the rest of it can be recovered. The two tools worth mentioning is, most of these tools I'm mentioning are free tools. There are a couple that cost money that also is relatively straightforward. All consultants and field agents use these tools. And these are also all the tools that I'm mentioning today are non-classified. They are used in the open industry, so they are pretty much commodity tools right now. The Recuva tool is the favorite one for recovering deleted files, and it can delete, it can kind of undelete. It has an undelete function and unremove function for Unix file systems, UNRM type of utility that will pull stuff out of SD cards, flash drives, camera drives. Your camcorders has a built-in disks, etc. And the encrypted disk detector, the EDD tool, is a favorite one of the incident response teams because this encrypted disk detector will check for any encrypted volumes. A lot of times, some of the evidence that are encrypted can be recovered. I first encountered this tool when there were some bank frauds, which is when I first used these tools, the encrypted volumes, and also most recently I started to, when I was teaching a class on CEH, Certified Ethical Hacking, I covered this tool I've been covering this tool for the last, 5 years now, to educate people on this very frequent type of virus that's going around called ransomware. Ransomware encrypts your volume, and then it asks you for money. It sends you a number and a credit and an account to send the money to. Unless you pay that money, it completely destroys your disk and permanently locks your disk. The way the ransomware Trojan works by encrypting every alternate volumes on your disk. So that unless you know how the sector map works on your disk, you will not be able to recover your disk. So you're better off paying money to recover your sensitive data. So that's a good backdoor to know because ransomware is hitting a lot of people. There have been hundreds of press reports on ransomware. And when crimes are committed, often the irony of crimes, cyber crimes, is it gets committed, but its detection does not happen for weeks. And typical average is 200 working days before a crime is detected, especially from insider attacks. And because of this nature of until you trip over a wire, you don't realize you got hacked or you had a fraud occur or a breach occur. By the time people are running around calling all the investigators and for digital forensics gathering, the crime scene has become so stale and so contaminated that we can't gather any evidence. So that's the part about disk. Let me move on to the next one, which is about registries. This applies to Windows. I call this the R forensics. Basically, it pulls out contextual metadata. Metadata is data about the user, data about you, which may be your zip code, which may be your date of birth, which could be your registration number. So couple of tools here. The USB view, the USB disk view is a tool. If you use this tool and you attach it and you just run this tool, you will be surprised on your laptop. So when I first joined this company about 10 months ago, I ran this tool on the laptop I was given, and I saw a listing of 110 USB sticks that had been attached to this, and I could tell that pretty much over the last 6 months, 8 months, all kinds of disks were attached. So it will give you a list of every device type, serial number, vendor ID, date of what USB stick you ever attached to that machine. And I looked at it and I said, okay, so this machine has been used quite a bit, so I should clean it properly before I start adding my files in case there are some dormant Trojan sitting here. Just that's how my mind thinks. So I went through a cleaning process to kind of clean the laptop, which was a previously used reformatted laptop, but it had a lot of USB stuck to it. Next tool is MuCache. The MuCache is really a registry key that will have a list of every application installed on your Windows operating system. It is a much finer grained version of what you could do through your task manager or your app manager. This is kind of like a lower level tool that can list everything, hidden apps that you never knew existed, a low-level registry UI. So let's go to the next one, which is the network. The network forensics is really not about looking at static data. This is the data in motion. This is actually Sift through monitoring traffic. And this is where we are able to look through almost a view of the packets on the network. We can capture packets. We can really, a set of files that you all may have heard of called PCAP files. That's kind of like the lingua franca of Cisco, Juniper, Palo Alto. All the devices are pretty much built on reading PCAP files. So the most popular tool that 90% of this industry uses for evidence capturing and or monitoring, used by good guys and bad guys, is the tool called Wireshark. Wireshark is exactly what it is. It's actually snoops on the wire, and there's a command line version of it, which is free, which is what I use, and then there's a premium version of it. So this is used by both the investigators, law enforcement folks, as well as the bad guys. They're used by the hackers as well as the crackers. So you can inspect frame by frame, packet by packet, user block by user block, user session by user session. So you can actually get into any level of granularity using Wireshark. Very powerful tool, low-level tool, but it will let you emulate our packets and sessions and frames to any detail you want. And then we have the network miner, which is a Windows-specific tool that allows you to look at all the open ports on your hosts. And we use this. It's a pretty popular tool. One of the first things we do for network forensics is we run this network miner, look at all the open ports, make sure, that gives us a sense for how open this machine was, how exposed this machine was, to how vulnerable it was to the various open ports. So I'm going to pause and take a question that has come in, or if there are any questions, feel free to ask. I'm going to go into two more tools, and those will get a little more low-level and more intricate. So I want to make sure that I stop after the network, because the disk and the registries were easy. The network forensics is medium, and then I'm getting into slightly more involved, intricate tools.
Yeah, so we have a question in the Q&A panel. Recently, there was news about Russia breaching the DNC email servers, and they used some Russian language code. Question is, are these forensic tools compatible with multilingual support?
Good question. Some of the tools are. Great question. Some of the tools are not. However, most of the tools are written except tools that have existed for a long time. There are two tools that are existed for over 15 years, 20 years, like Wireshark. It's a 20-year-old tool. Another tool that I've not talked about is a DD. That's a Unix utility or Linux utility that has existed since 1969. Those utilities are not localized and are not going to have multilingual support unless you build a little front end to it. But the newer tools are internationalized. Therefore, you could get a different, especially the European languages. If the specific question is, are they using the Russian language code? Well, if you use UTF-8, a lot of some of the newer tools will have localization support.
Great. Thank you. And there's another question. Are there any plugins for Wireshark that you would recommend?
There are a bunch of plugins for Wireshark, depending on what applications are. In fact, Wireshark plugins are kind of like Ruby with gems in it. Like you could use, any one of the gems from the rich set of libraries. So Wireshark has got dozens and dozens of plugins. I would go through and try out a couple that work for you, and I would use those, whether you're building demos or you're building a prototype on a client site, or there are tons of plugins for Wireshark. I've only used probably, 30% of the plugins, but the plugins keep getting authored by the community, and it continues to grow. And especially Wireshark is probably used across 90% of the forensic industry will use Wireshark. In fact, there's no other better tool for network forensics than Wireshark, especially the command line version of it. So moving on to the next set of forensics, let me talk about the browser forensic. The browser forensics is popular. There'll be a lot of questions, and yes, there are plugins for this one, just like there are plugins for Wireshark. So the browser plugins are all about scanning the session trails, or scanning what I call the breadcrumbs. Breadcrumbs are those little digital trail of digital shadow you have left behind. It's almost like me replaying your history, even if you have erased your .history file. So this particular session trails, you can have a set of browser cache be the ones that are getting scanned. You also have other set of caches that are very specific to browsers. Some of these are now what has given that we have at least a dozen different browsers, the browser forensic tools have kind of gotten fragmented into, it used to be just IE and Mozilla, and now there are at least a dozen browsers, and the different browsers now have slightly different forensic tools. Like the specific one for Chrome, it's only for Chrome. This Chrome cache view reads the cache folder. It'll tell you every URL every time you have access to file. And across all the browsers, you will find a similar tool. I just listed the Chrome because that one was something that I've used more than the others, but I've helped others, identify other browser viewers, the cache viewers for other browsers. The My Last Search is just a pretty high-level tool. That one will just create a histogram of all the searches, and even if you go to various different search engines, it'll still capture those things. Now, there are ways to get around the My Last Search. Not obvious, but there are ways to, get around. Some folks use the incognito mode. Some people use after every command they do they run a utility to erase history before they execute the next command. So your stack is never more than 2 or 3 commands. And it will not be as interesting. So there's a question I see here for the USB-D view. So I will find you the link, or I'll send you the link. This tool may have I'm trying to answer a question in the window that the USB-D view is not available through Google, but I can get you that tool. I think the name has changed, but remember this. I'm not going to say which ones, but there are a couple of tools that I've mentioned are not Googleable, but they are locatable. You have to get it the other ways. And when I do another set of these seminars in future specifically for mobile, Android, and iPhone, you will find that there are many more tools that are not even available in the App Store. You just have to go into websites with IP addresses, not even website names, to get these tools downloaded, especially the ones that are more forensic type tools. So moving on to the apps, this is the highest level. the A forensics, the app forensics are about reading the app logs, the application logs for all your applications. You could read these without even knowing your password. You could go into the Skype log view tool, and you can basically get a good histogram of all the incoming, outgoing, Skype in, Skype out, every chat you've had, every file transfer you've made. So the Skype account log view is very extensively used, especially after Microsoft acquired Skype. It's even more extensively used by the corporate IR teams, incident response teams. Pretty useful unless the culprit is sophisticated. The next one is a messenger tool. I only listed Yahoo Messenger Decoder, but now that Yahoo got acquired by Verizon, I should change it for my next session to pick another browser, pick another messenger, not Yahoo, or maybe this will be called the Verizon Messenger, not sure. But this one actually will view the chat sessions. It'll view your SMSs, text messages, including your erased messages, including your private messages, public messages, every emoticon you send to everybody, and again, you don't need to know the password. More and more, you will see that all the tools I shared with you, most of these tools operate at a level. It's not layer 7 tools. These are, lower level, meaning layer 2, 3, 4, 5. Password does not mean anything to these tools if you're reading block by block, nibble by nibble, bit by bit. If you're reading packet by packet, password doesn't mean anything. It's just another data block. So most of these tools will allow you to bypass passwords. So you have to be you have to be responsible using these tools. I keep saying this in every one of the sessions I do, that with great power comes great responsibility. So you have to think like that Spider-Man. You can't just run these tools. If you run these tools on open networks, especially flat networks where you don't have segments figured out, you will end up making your IT team very unhappy. So just be careful where and how you practice this. I would say practice this at home, and if you're at work, then make sure you're in an isolated segment when you start running these experiments. I just finished the 8 different tools for the cyber forensics. I'm going to talk about some general investigation techniques that we use and some of the other tools without which the discussion will be somewhat incomplete. I've listed the 5 or 6 tools here. I'm going to talk about a couple of these. The others you can get quite a bit of information on, and these are available from NIST. A lot of best practices are there. These tools are fairly high-level tools. The Sift tool is the SANS Investigative Forensic Toolkit. That's what it stands for, SANS Investigative Forensic Toolkits. It essentially allows you to read syslogs. It allows you to read syslogs in a nice temporal, like a time series format. It also there's a way to examine all the recycling bins each time you recycle your deleted files, and you're thinking you're recycling, but I can pretty much go and reverse play for everything that you recycled. So like I said, anything you delete on your computer is not deleted. It can be rewinded back. The clock can be rewinded back to where it was. And there's another tool called Scalpel. That one actually does specific data carving. It carves out the data. Data is often a lot of noise and very little signal, from my experience of doing this since, I think, year 2002, which is when I first got into this, started working with the agencies, et cetera. There's a lot of junk. So big data is mostly useless. Very little of it is useful, and very few people know how to get to that useful cross-section of useless data. Scientists have a hard time hiring programmers and statisticians. When they can't figure out what to do, they call them data scientists. Who is a programmer who knows statistics, or a statistician who knows programming, but you have to be able to use a scalpel to carve out the data. It's almost like from the lots and lots of useless data, you should be able to carve out the fillet which has the main value. You should be able to carve out the fillet out of the data deluge and be able to make some decisions with that information, and that's the hard part. So a couple of tools that are very useful and they've been around forever. Like I said, DD is one of those raw evidence formats, which is the lowest level formatting tool you could get, and there's the E01, which is an expert witness format. I have served as an expert witness in the court several times, and these are the tools that we have to somehow get familiar with over time. So the expert witness format is a specific, the E01 format is a format that you specifically need evidence to be presented in a court of law. And then I have the third one, which is really the advanced forensic format, which is new, it's getting adopted. It has not gone mainstream yet, but thought I would mention that because these are the tools. On the left are the tools, and on the right are the output formats of these tools. The DD has been around forever. Any system, anywhere, you could use the DD format. That's the E01 is the expert witness format, which is what like a mainstream, and the AFF is a new emerging standard. So let me talk about the DD specifically. It's a command line. Any Linux box will have it. Essentially, you could run this. You specify the input file descriptor, the output file descriptor, and there you go. Essentially, the block size specification is optional, and you can have some flags added to it. Overall, this tool will read anything, byte by byte, nibble by nibble, and I've been using it since 1984. It has been around forever, and this tool has not changed. Linux, Unix, everything has come and gone, but this tool has not changed. It's kind of like that FTP utility that has not changed forever, and it predates Unix and predates ARPA, early 70s tools. The next one is a new tool, the Explico, one of the ones I listed. This is actually an open source tool for network forensic analysis. It's used by the incident response time and the crime scene investigators quite a bit. It extracts the application level data. It pulls it up into the layer 7 format so that you can see an application view of low-level network packets. Fairly handy for extracting evidence. So I'm going to start, tying it together, and we're about 35 minutes into this. I was planning for 40. Let's see. It's an iterative process. The process for cyber forensics is it takes time. It has to be done with care, because we don't have the luxury of saying, oh, that didn't work, let me try this, because I've just erased that buffer. That's why a compromised machine, if you touch the keyboard, you will screw up the evidence. You will make the data contaminated. Best is if you go find another port on that computer and take a little vacuum and you extract out the data. I'm using the word vacuum metaphorically because I had to write a program calling it a vacuum to vacuum out the data out of the different ports. The best port that I miss a lot from experience that no longer is available, that used to be one of the fastest and the most reliable port, because nobody knew it was a bidirectional port except a select few. In the that was a port which some of you may be familiar with, is called the Centronics parallel port. That port used to be the best port for extracting evidence, but these days none of the computers have the Centronics parallel port, so we have little converters. On one end is a little USB, on the other end is a Centronics parallel, so that so that we can still pull out the data that way. So it's an iterative process. It takes hours. It's almost like evidence capture. When you look at you're working with a careful set of brushes and powders and fingerprints, it takes time. It takes time. And the best of breed tools, I only gave you a cross-section of an entree of tools. These tools have to be used in conjunction with each other, or depending on the situation, depending on the exposure. but what the sampling I gave you of 8 different tools, of 8 different forensics, and 2 different tools in each forensics. So I shared with you 16 different tools, and I also listed 4 other tools at the NIST site. So you now have 24 tools at your, that you can use and access and play with to learn about cyber forensics. So it's a step-by-step preparatory step where we have to acquire, analyze, and only then we can report on it, because just reporting stuff is not going to make data very useful, because you could be reporting on the wrong data. So I see a question here that the keyboard buffers are hard to do forensics on. Is it because they're maintained in memory and it's much more protected? The short answer is no. Keyboard buffers are hard to do forensics on because, not because they're maintained in memory, not because it's protected, because you can get into the user segments bypassing the kernel relatively easily using absolute address and relative address, but it's a lot harder because the keyboard buffers tend to be very small. And the keyboard buffer, if it's filled up, 1 or 2 extra strokes will push the data out of it from the other end. So the keyboard buffer tends to be, most keyboard buffers I'm familiar with, maybe the new ones are better or more bulletproof, but the ones I'm familiar with, the keyboard buffers tend to be small. So that's why I hope I answered your question. It's small and it's easy to lose accuracy, unlike other buffers that tend to be large enough that 1 or 2 extra keystrokes won't contaminate them. So summarizing some of the principles we learned is, you have to assess user activity with patterns. This is where people confuse a lot between data analytics and data analysis. Analysis is not a fashionable word anymore, and analytics is so fashionable that a lot of times it's useless. So analysis and analytics, if you ask a statistician, if you ask a mathematician, you're going to get a completely different answer than you would get in the software engineering industry. I suggest you ask a statistician or a mathematician about the analysis versus analytics. One is about data patterns, one is about the data itself. Analyzing data remnants I use data remnant metaphorically because most of you have heard about carpet remnants. If you're getting your house carpeted, the cut pieces are called carpet remnants. I'm using the term data remnants as a metaphor to show you or to share with you that what state these transient states are at, because audit logs are everywhere, but audit logs are never adequate for evidence, which is why audit is only a part of the compliance story. It's not audit logs will not give you everything, but it's necessary that we start with audit logs, and then we have to deal with the contextual artifacts, which is, I call this the perishable digital data. Digital data that is perishable will be the ones in the keyboard buffer, ones in the memory, ones in all the other nick and canny and the tight spots where there is no image of it back in the disk. That's called perishable digital data. So this is about, forensics is hard stuff, guys, which is why not forensics, you won't find a book on forensics that easily. You have to have done it, and you have to have taken a class in it or learn it or practice it, because what we all know, and this is something I picked up from General Colin Powell's speech to when he was speaking at a conference, a very small conference, to a few of us about offensive cyber tactics. About known knowns are the facts. We know those. The known unknowns are the questions, and the unknown knowns are our intuitions, and where we are dealing with this cyber forensics are the unknown unknowns, which is where we go into a situation, we don't know what to expect. We don't know what machine to pull evidence from, but only thing we know is a crime has been committed. We don't know on which machine, we don't know what got taken, but we know that somebody's disk drive got locked up. So when we go into these crime scenes blindfolded, it's mostly about the unknown unknowns that makes it a more exploratory rather than iterative or deterministic. And that's what makes it hard. That's also what makes it fun. So to wrap it up, I gave you really a high-level view of digital forensics, took you down the digital forensics route where I felt this is a topic that is not written up, does not make the headlines, but it is an important topic because this is what happens for months after a crime is committed. After a crime is committed, this is what happens for months at a time. And make no mistake, there is no 1 or 2 day forensic project. Never, ever that. It takes a long time to detect. Like I told you, average 150 to 200 days before a crime is detected. About $300 to $400 million are spent trying to turn the place upside down. Typically, right now, cyber breaches are costing us $400 billion a year. And if you look at if you read the latest Juniper research, they're basically talking about data breaches is about $2 trillion annually by 2019. So it's 4 times of what it is in 2016 is going to be in 2019. So the cause is often crimes committed from inside. Cause is often sophisticated patterns, sophisticated persistent attacks from the outside. So the advanced persistent threat from outside in, once somebody knows that they're going to come and penetrate your fortress, they will do it no matter what. You can get around it, but you can't fight it. Same way, if an insider, if a good guy turns bad and he's inside your fortress, he will let the guards in no matter what. And that's how the Trojan horse came in hundreds of years ago, because you can't fight a two-front war. But knowing about what to do after this, I thought will be useful. So that's your cyber forensics 101, and what's the implication of it from what can you take away. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope it was educational. I'll take more questions. Thank you very much. Back to Kristen.
Great. Thank you, Dipto. I just opened a poll so you can rate this webcast. Please, we welcome your feedback. But if you have any questions, please ask them in the Q&A panel or the chat window. And you can also ask questions over the phone now. If you press *6 or #6, you can unmute your phone line to ask a question there. If you're on the audio broadcast, you can also ask a question by clicking the phone icon with a question mark in the WebEx window. And then that will allow me to unmute your line so you can ask a question over your phone, the microphone on your computer. And just to clarify, Dipto, there was a little bit of confusion about USB-D view as opposed to USB-D eView. Was that you said it could potentially have been renamed, or?
Yeah, I will. What I'll do is I'll give the let's post that as a comment on the same community website, so that everybody can see the answer. Let me just find it, and I'll send it to you to post it.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
Lots of positive feedback coming in. I hope everyone appreciates my Pokemon Go themed webcast rating poll.
I think it's pretty original.
All right, I don't see any questions coming in, Dipto, but if anyone thinks of any questions, you can respond to my follow-up email, and I can make sure they get to Dipto or you can comment on the community thread at the CA Security community. You can go there by going to ca.com/talksecurity. That's where we have the thread around this conversation. So thank you again, Dipto. This was very, very insightful, and I hope we get to do a webcast together again soon.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great rest of your day, and we'll see you on the next community webcast.